Hello, Hyrule, and welcome to A Link Between Zeldas, Episode 1. Wow. I am speechless. I don't even know where to begin right now. I originally recorded this episode on Sunday, and I wasn't still getting used to this whole talking to myself thing. Didn't really like the quality. I'm like, you know what? I have all the thoughts written down. I'm just going to record it, maybe loosen up a little bit. And at that point, I did not see the Nintendo Direct yet. So I'm like, at that point, it's like, all right, wait. Just wait, see the Nintendo Direct, see the Link's Awakening stuff, see how much they show of that. Maybe they'll have some HD Zeldas coming to the Switch that were originally on the Wii U. And yeah, I just recorded Tuesday. Oh, by the way, I should mention that if you haven't seen Episode 0 yet, Episode 0 goes into a description of what this podcast is and what I'm doing with it. So if you haven't seen that and you're confused with some of the things I say, I would definitely watch Episode 0 first. It's kind of the precursor to this. But man, I was not expecting what I just saw at all. So for those of you who have seen the Nintendo Direct, you know what I'm talking about. At the end of the Nintendo Direct, you get some swirling lights. And it was kind of this, the end of the Nintendo Directs do often end with those little, like, nuggets, like, ooh, what's the little surprise they have under their hat? And I was like, oh, finally, it's the Metroid Prime trilogy, or possibly a new Star Fox game, or just something like that. I was not expecting to see anything on the next Zelda game they were making. That's not something they usually release information on until maybe a year before it comes out. Like, they don't have a habit of doing that. And not to mention, I was not expecting a legitimate Breath of the Wild sequel. They've been saying that a lot. I've seen a lot of buzz about how, they're working on the sequel to Breath of the Wild. To me, that just means they're working on the next Zelda game, to which I always exclaimed, well, duh. Of course they're working on the next Zelda game. It's one of their big tentpole franchises. Of course they're working on it. A direct sequel, though, that is not something I was expecting. That's so rare for the Zelda games. You've seen it with Majora's Mask was a direct sequel of Ocarina of Time. Zelda 2, more or less, was a direct sequel of the first Legend of Zelda. I believe that was Link's kid in the second Zelda. You have A Link Between Worlds, which is a spiritual successor to A Link to the Past. You have Phantom Hourglass, which is a sequel, more or less a direct sequel to Wind Waker. I shouldn't say more or less. It's a direct sequel to Wind Waker. But I have never seen a Zelda game. It's not even that I haven't seen it. That I know of. There is no Zelda game that's a direct sequel that takes place in the same exact overworld. That is just... I remember it's a double-edged sword, and I'm going to get into that. But I remember at the end of Breath of the Wild, where, spoiler alert if you haven't finished Breath of the Wild, but you and Zelda are there, you're looking at the world, and she's like, I heard something, I think she's like, something's up at Zora Domain, let's go. And I'm like, oh, cool, is this going to be the first Zelda game where you can actually go around the world afterwards and kind of see the ramifications of your actions and actually see the world settle after Ganon, after the calamity? But no, it went back to, the normal, right, whatever your last save was, or you can go do, like, mode super special plus or whatever. But this game looks like it's pretty much doing that. It looks like you're going to be able to see what the world is after Breath of the Wild, which, again, makes me wonder why they're showing this now. Because you only see this type of thing when they're getting closer to release. Now, if they are using the same overworld, they have all of those assets, maybe they were able to make this Zelda game a lot quicker. You don't see too much, but you see enough to think about. You see Link and Zelda are together. It looks like Zelda has a haircut. That's what it looked like to me. I tried kind of looking at it from a few different angles. I'm not sure if there's just like a ponytail or something that's under her shirt, but it looks like she has a haircut. That's not a big deal. So you can see some cave drawings, and they're in the castle, or underneath it. You see some cave drawings, and you see What everyone, including myself, is assuming is Ganon's corpse under the castle, and I guess you could assume it's Ganon's corpse. Now, I only did the final boss battle in Breath of the Wild once, but I'm pretty sure you fought Calamity Ganon in that big form of his outside of the castle. But my memory is a little fuzzy. I did not go back and replay that boss battle since, so I'm not sure. But I'm almost certain that's how it happened. So it could be Ganon's corpse, or it does kind of resemble one of those monks or deities that you see at the end of the shrines. Could be that. Could be a new enemy. I'm not sure. It seems to have some sort of direct link to Link. Haha, pun intended. Because in one of the very split-second shots, you can see Link holding out his hand, and there's kind of these, like, orb, like this beam of light coming out of his hand, and it looks like at one point he's grabbing Zelda's hand, but then at another point it's the creature grabbing Zelda's hand. But it's just stationary. It's just there, kind of sitting back, and then you see it kind of wake up at the end, kind of zombified. And then it says a sequel to Breath of the Wild in development. And that's just crazy. Now, I said it was a double-edged sword, in my opinion. It's a double-edged sword because, on one hand, I loved Breath of the Wild, and I would love to see more of it. But I also like how every Zelda game is unique. And as much as I would love to return to that world, I feel like maybe instead you could do DLC for that game and then also be making a different Zelda game. You already did DLC for Zelda Breath of the Wild. You can do more. So if this is a full game, I would like there to be differences. I don't want you to just go around the same exact world. I would like there to be some ramifications in the world. Some definitely, everybody's crying for like bigger and possibly more differentiating dungeons. But again, if they're doing Breath of the Wild overworld again, I'm wondering if it is going to carry over that same aesthetic. Because that was probably my biggest complaint about Zelda is you had 125 or 120 shrines that all looked exactly the same. Different puzzles, but they all looked and felt the same. And you had 4 quote-unquote dungeons in the Beast that, again, all looked the same. They were still fun, but it's nothing like what you got in Ocarina of Time. They went for quantity, not necessarily over quality, but quantity over differentiation. And I would say it was mostly an even trade, but it definitely left me wanting more. Like more expansive, bigger dungeons. I'm also wondering if there's co-op elements to this Zelda game. I mean, you see Link and Zelda traveling together. You didn't necessarily see any gameplay. But they're together. Are they together the whole game, or is that just the beginning of the game? But what if they're putting that there just in case you want co-ops? What if they're making it so you can switch in between the two? All that would be very fascinating. What if Sheik makes an appearance? Or, Zelda makes an appearance as Sheik. It was just a teaser. But it definitely surprised me. It was definitely an awesome thing to have at the end of the Nintendo Direct. And I was not expecting it. Breath of the Wild was an amazing game. I loved every minute of it. It's definitely up there for my favorite Zelda games. It's right now it's definitely like top 3. We'll see at the end of this journey of me playing through all of these games where it ends up. But right now it's up there. And a sequel, the other issue with a direct sequel is I'm just going to be comparing it to Breath of the Wild the entire time. How does it hold up? Did it do enough different? So there's a lot of questions, a lot of things that aren't going to be answered for a while. I would assume that down the road, there's going to be, probably between now and September, there's going to be some sort of Zelda Direct. I only say that because they really didn't show anything from Link's Awakening. At all. They showed some new footage. Now, I also have now played the game, so I don't want them to spoil anything. But besides showing some footage, some extra footage than what they showed previously, they didn't tell us any new information about the game. We don't know if there's going to be any added content, if the game's going to be fleshed out more than it already is. I'm not sure if this was in the original game or not, but it looked like they added this thing where you can kind of like make your own dungeon crawler, which looked really neat. And you get like certain items at the end of it, but that might have been in the original game. I don't know. I haven't played it. I don't want to look up anything about it because I'm looking to be surprised. Another thing about just hopping back to the Breath of the Wild sequel is if I'm on this quest to play and beat every Zelda game, which includes replaying Breath of the Wild, I now have a time limit on this. Because the sequel would obviously, in timeline formation, come after Breath of the Wild. So I need to play through everything that happened before it, which is everything. It's the next thing on the list. That's how time works, if you didn't know. So I feel like that does put a time limit on me to finish these games. Which, that's fine. I like a challenge. It's just challenging to balance playing through all of these Zelda games as well as all of the other video games that I want to play. And E3 showed me... E3 in general, for me, I felt like was pretty underwhelming up until last night and today, but I got me some Final Fantasy VII coming. I got me some Cyberpunk coming. Some Doom Eternal coming. I have other games coming out that I really want to play. It's not just going to be all Zelda all the time. I need to make time for both. Maybe I'm definitely gonna have to take a vacation for Final Fantasy VII. I was the crazy guy who bought the $300 and something edition. I know it's not worth that much. I know. But Final Fantasy VII has always been, and most likely will always be, my favorite video game. So when I just saw that statue, I'm like, they made that for me. I'm the market for them. The deluxe edition was $80 and it came with almost as much content. The $80 bundle is probably your best bet. It comes with the art book, the CD, and the steelbook. The only thing that you're adding with that $300 version is the Play Art Sky figure, which looks amazing. And I think one or two other DLC things that don't really matter to me. There's like an extra summon or something like that. But you didn't come to this podcast to listen to me gush about Final Fantasy VII, but I should just do... After the Zelda thing's all done, I should just go through every Final Fantasy game. Oh my god, I would never do that. There's so many Final Fantasy games that are unplayable. Going back to Zelda, though, those are my impressions of the Nintendo Direct as far as the Zelda stuff went. Breath of the Wild, very surprising. Link's Awakening, not a lot of new footage or information. I'm fine with not a lot of new footage. Would have liked a bit more information on the game. Did get a release date, though. I believe it was September 20th. I didn't write it down. I'm pretty sure it was September 20th. And then there was Cadence of Hyrule, which I'm not sure if it was new gameplay or not, but I'm getting that. Looks really fun. I didn't play any of the other games by the developer, but it looks very tactical and interesting, and it looks really fun. So looking forward to getting that too. So that brings us back to what I was originally going to talk about this episode, which was the beginning of the Zelda continuity. And the first game I played for this whole project of mine, this unnamed quest of mine. I should name it, I guess, but whatever. So before I talk about Skyward Sword, I wanted to talk about everything that comes before Skyward Sword, because whether or not you believe in this whole Hyrule Historia timeline, maybe it's real, maybe it's BS, who knows? I'm kind of on the fence, to be honest, but I'm going through this with the mindset that it is real. But regardless of what you think, you can all kind of atone that Skyward Sword would be first. It's the first story involving the first Zelda, the first Link, before any reincarnation things. Well, I mean, Zelda herself is a reincarnation before they are reincarnated again, I suppose. And not too much is known about what happens prior to that. And the game is not called The Legend of Hyrule or The Legend of Hylia or The Legend of Demise. It's The Legend of Zelda and the story of Link. That is what all of the games are about. So there's never going to be a game about Goddess Hylia or the creation of the world or where Demise came from. But I do have a lot of questions about it. And I did a bit of research, not a terrible amount. I went to some wikis. I tried to look up what I could. And a lot of this information, a lot of the bedrock is based off of the Hyrule Historia, the book. And it all begins with creation, which is when what I used to just refer to as the goddesses, but I guess they're the golden goddesses. Din, Nehru, and Farore. Din, the goddess of power, created the land. Nehru, the goddess of wisdom, created order. And Farore, or Farore, I've always said Farore, goddess of courage, created diverse inhabitants. Now, you hear about these goddesses in other games. The most prominent one that comes to my mind is Ocarina of Time, and I'm almost certain that Nehru created the sky. I'm going to be playing Ocarina of Time pretty soon. I am more than halfway done with Minish Cap. So I'll be finding that out soon, but I'm definitely going to keep that in mind because, the Ocarina of Time was one of the first, if not the first Zelda game I played. So I just thought that was very interesting when I played that game that they talked about that, like the creation of the world. I thought that was pretty awesome when they brought that up. And I've played it so many times, you think I would just remember, but I realized recently that it's been a good 10 years since I've played the game. But I'm almost certain that Nehru created the sky. It was land, sky, and the people. But I could be wrong. And it's going to be very interesting to kind of relive that and find out. But they left behind the Triforce, which is able to grant one wish to an individual who has all of those qualities. Wisdom, power, courage. They left it to Goddess Hylia. Not Golden Goddess Hylia, which is, it's probably why they added Golden to kind of differentiate the two. They left it to Goddess Hylia, and time passed an amount. There is no years in the Zelda universe, so who the hell knows how much time passed. But eventually, Lord Demise came up through a fissure in the earth, grabbed a bunch of monsters, waged war against Hylia, tried to get the Triforce, and she banishes all humans. Well, not banishes, saves. She saves all humans, puts them up into the sky, puts this cloud barrier between them. And then with the other 5 tribes, as it says in the book, with the other 5 tribes, she wages war against Demise and eventually seals them away. And then thousands of years pass, and you get Skyward Sword. But again, there's a lot of questions I have in that time. Hylia, she's a goddess too. But did the other goddesses create her? Was she along for the ride and they're like, all right, you stay here. We're gonna, fix this planet up, give it a genie bottle, and then peace out. You stay here, though. That's your punishment. You're in the corner. You're going to stay here and guard the Triforce. Or, and this is what I personally think. I think they found a human, or being. Maybe she wasn't a human, but I think she was a human, for things I'll explain later. I think they found a human who possessed all of the traits they were looking for. And for some reason, they couldn't stay. They just came to fix the mess and peace out. And they found someone who had courage, power, and wisdom. And they're like, you are the perfect one to bestow these powers of the goddess onto. But you can never use it. You can never use the Triforce because evidently goddesses cannot use the Triforce. Who knew? That's when you have the era of Goddess Hylia. And at some point, she gave her sailcloth to a hero who may or may not have helped in the battle. We know nothing about that, except that it probably happened because at the beginning of Skyward Sword, that's the this wing ceremony you have is at the end, Zelda gives Link her sailcloth, and It was like this big special thing, and then you try 8 times to make that landing, and you just can't get the Wiimote to work. At least that I might have just sucked at the game. I don't know. Half the time I could not get the Wiimote, specifically when it came to landing. I had to. I'm getting way off track. I had to redo that damned boss battle when that demon was coming out of the sealed circle. I had to redo that final boss fight against him 3 or 4 times, and each time I had to redo it from the beginning just because I could not make that final landing onto his head. And I just found that to be the hardest part of the game, was just making that landing. I couldn't make it happen. But I digress. We don't know anything about that. If there was a hero and that did happen, we know absolutely zilch about him. Except that maybe he existed. There's a lot you don't know. Demise, where did he come from? I would just... It's kind of the yin-yang thing. The balance. You have someone like Goddess Hylia who has all of this power and is like the ultimate good. For the ultimate good, you have the ultimate evil. Or else we don't get fun games. No, that's how it is in general. In most things, in most storytelling, that's the way it goes. So you have Hylia, who with her wings, who it's kind of the heavenly force, and you have Demise, the devilish force, coming out of the fissures of the earth with all of these monsters that he's gathered from, I don't know, wherever. Boca? I don't know. Waging war against Hylia, and she takes the temple, half the temple of Hylia, half of the sacred temple, puts, I guess, remaining humans on it, and sends it up into the sky. And I only assume that there was so few humans left, because in all of the sky, thousands of years later, you have all these different, like, little islands that she also might have put up there. But, I mean, it's not a lot of humans around. The most populated Zelda game I've seen is Breath of the Wild. Because you do see random towns and random people actually running around the world. And I know that the further you go back, there's more limitations. But, I mean, the world has always been kind of deserted. And that's probably just a game design thing. It has absolutely nothing to do with whether or not there was a population there or was not. But as someone who's been playing these games, that's kind of what I have to go over. But why just the humans? Why were just the humans sent up and no other race? Was no other race worth preserving? And I think that's because this goes back to my whole thing about Hylia previously being a human. I think that she had to do that because she could only be reincarnated as another human, or as they're eventually called, Hylian. So you have the humans sent up and a cloud barrier put between the sky and the earth. And the remaining 5 tribes, which I can only assume, based on Skyward Sword, are the Kikwi, the forest-dwelling, kind of owl-looking, big-nosed creatures, the Perella, the seahorsey-looking ones, the Magmas, who are the moles, the Gorons, which you meet like 3 of them in the game, and the ancient robots. So those are presumably the 5 races that kind of helped wage that war, either just in the center where the temple was, or possibly around it. I'm not sure. Don't really know much about the war either. I'm assuming, again, going back to the population thing, I'm assuming the Gorons just got decimated. There's 3 of them. You see 3. There might be more around, but I mean, if there was Gorons, you'd presumably see them in the rocky area near a volcano. They're like snakes. They need the heat source. And it's full of magmas. Not a Goron to be seen there. Or, there might have been one. I kind of forget where you meet them along the way. I actually thought there was only one that I kept seeing until I was looking back on the screenshots. And I realized, oh geez, there's like 3. Oh, I guess I'm a racist when it comes to Gorons. So yeah, they're sent off into the sky. Half the temple goes up. Oh, neat little thing I found out. I wish I had paid more attention when I was actually playing the game, but I guess if in the game, if you're looking at the temple, that was in the sky, and the other half of the temple that was on like the sacred ground area. There's like this kind of like half split in half dome ceiling, and I guess you can kind of see the symbols that will eventually become the medallions in Ocarina of Time. And I didn't notice that, but I thought that was really cool. In the YouTube version, I'll put up a screenshot of that. Sorry if you're listening to the audio version, but go look at it if you have the game and you've never seen that, or just look up a picture. It's really neat. It's also kind of weird that the all of like the sealed grounds and the temple of like the Hylia Shrine Temple and the Temple of Time, one of them anyways, we're all in this same thing at this place that's most likely going to become the Temple of Time that you see in Ocarina of Time. It's all this one place. All this stuff going on in this one little area. So that's pretty neat. So I'll probably wait to talk about what I think of the races in the game. But what I do want to do, I've been thinking a lot about how I want to present information throughout this process. Do I want to initially give my review of the game, my quick thoughts, or do I want to save that for the end, or do I want to kind of go over it in chunks? I'm just going to kind of see what happens and go from there, ad-lib it. Something I do want to do is go over for each Zelda game kind of where Nintendo was at the time, as well as kind of my history with the game. And for some of that, it might be very, not much to say or very boring, but I think for Skyward Sword especially, there's actually a lot to say about where Nintendo was at this time, and a tad bit to say about where I was. So Skyward Sword came out in November of 2011. It was delayed a year. I think in total it ended up being delayed 2 years, but it was supposed to come out in 2010, and it was delayed an additional year. It had an iffy E3. There was a lot of interference with the Wiimote. It sold average. For a Zelda game, it sold average. 3.67 million units sold. Now, if you ignore remakes completely, so you're ignoring Ocarina of Time for the 3DS, Twilight Princess for the Wii U, things like that, it still sold about half of those games, half as many as those games. It was outsold by A Link Between Worlds for the 3DS, which that's nothing to scoff at. Link Between Worlds was a great game. It was also outsold by Link's Crossbow Training, which that's rough. That is rough. That's a hard pill to swallow. So before I get into why I think that is, but I think it might be pretty obvious why it sold the way it did. Nintendo in 2011 was at a weird juncture. This was a weird juncture for a Zelda game to be coming out. It launched with Twilight Princess, and this was definitely at the end of the Wii's life. It was 1 year removed from the Wii U coming out, which they knew. The Wii U had to have had like a 2 to 3 year development. So it's interesting to think that they didn't wait and launch this with the Wii U, because they could have done both, kind of like what they did with Breath of the Wild. Launching Twilight Princess with the Wii and Breath of the Wild with the Switch was genius. Pure genius. I'm like 99% sure Twilight Princess launched with the Wii. It might have been a little off. It might have come out maybe like half a year later. But Breath of the Wild is part of the reason why the Switch excelled very early on. Also, it's really neat. I love mine. I'm just saying, like, Breath of the Wild, let's be honest, it helped. But they didn't decide to do that. They decided to launch it in 2011, 1 year before the Wii U came out, and at a time where Wii sales had been steadily dropping year to year. The Wii peaked really early. And, it by this point, it was kind of known as a joke. Like, no one can denounce what it did for sales. It sold over 100 million units. That is a lot. It's either their best or second best selling system. I'm almost certain it's their best. 2010 saw a sales drop, and 2011 saw another drop. Skyward Sword came out Black Friday of that year, and it sold average for a Zelda game, but 500,000 Wii units were shipped out or sold that Black Friday, and it's the most that the Wii had in its existence for Black Friday. And Legend of Zelda had a lot to do with that. Wii Motion Plus had a lot to do with that. Part of the development of the game was the Wii Motion Plus, which caused a rockier development than with most Zelda games, to the point where they almost scrapped using it. But it caused a lot of people to either buy a new Wii with Wii Motion Plus if they had already gotten rid of it, like me, or it caused them to buy the special edition of Zelda with the new controller. So the development was rockier, mostly just with the Wii Motion Plus and with Skyloft itself. From what I've read, a lot of the other areas of the game, like the woods and like the water area and like the desert and all that stuff was fine. The Wii Motion Plus was causing issues to the point where they nearly scrapped it. Scrapped it to, I assume, similar to what Twilight Princess had, which was basically just shaking the Wiimote to press A, so at that point, just let me use a GameCube controller. But also Skyloft, I guess there was a... I remember... So Game Grumps recently went through all of Skyward Sword, and if you haven't seen it, I would check it out, because Aaron has a lot of insight on things like that, and it's really funny. And he had mentioned early on that the whole game was remade, and I've not been able to find any evidence of that, but I have found evidence that Skyloft was pretty much remade from the ground up, because something wasn't clicking with it. Something about the people, it didn't work, and how the area, they wanted it to be a central hub, and the birds were added in like later than I thought they had been added in, which is funny because when I first saw the game, I'm like, oh, that's why the Hylian crest looks like that. It's a bird. They used to fly birds. Where did they go? I don't know. I guess they turned into Rudo eventually. They flew away from Skyloft and just learned to walk and talk and be on two legs. And I'm half serious. I do think that is possibly where the Rudo race came from, since you don't see the Rudos until much later on. They were introduced in Wind Waker, which on the timeline scale is only 1/3 of the timeline. Then you see them in Breath of the Wild. Maybe other places that I'm just not aware of. So Skyloft had to be redone a lot, and that caused a lot of delays. And the Wii Motion Plus caused a lot of delays. And for what it's worth, when I hold the sword up, it's up. When I move it around, I'm just sitting there and slowly moving my wrist around. It is slowly moving around. I would say that they actually, for what it's worth, did a really good job with that. They accomplished what they set out to do. It's just, should they have? But anyways, at the time, just a very interesting time. Low sales, right about to do the Wii U, which I didn't get. So it is interesting that they launched it then. Kind of like with the Switch, where even though the Switch is still selling, Nintendo's mentality is they don't want sales to slow down at all. So Zelda was definitely a sales bump mentality, but also it was going to be originally coming out in like 2009 anyways, which I don't know how they were going to pull that off. That seems like a really short development time, because they didn't start it until right after Twilight Princess came out. So yeah, that's where it was. Sold pretty averagely. That's mostly because of the Wii, though, not necessarily because of Zelda. A lot of people by that time had more or less gotten their fill. I was one of them. I had a Wii. I got a Wii for Christmas of either Christmas of 06 or Christmas of 07. I had it for all of 9 months. And then I realized that there just was not enough games on it that I wanted. And I traded it in to GameStop, got a 360, never looked back, enjoyed Halo 3 for like 8 months. It was the only game I had and I didn't care. So then, one year prior to Zelda coming out, I knew they told you really early on that you needed the Wii Motion Plus. I knew I was going to need a new Wii to play it, and I needed to play the new Zelda game. Not to mention my GameCube broke. So it was this perfect storm where the Christmas of 2010, I bought the 25th anniversary Wii, the red one. I still have it. It's what I used to play Skyward Sword recently. And 1 year later, Skyward Sword comes out. I pop it in. I think, wow, this is going to be something I'm just instantly sucked into, and I'm going to be just playing it for months, or at least weeks. I played for a total of 4 hours and then didn't pick it up again until 2014. It didn't grab me. It didn't initially grab me like every other Zelda game did. It had similar issues. Twilight Princess actually had this issue a little worse, where you start off kind of doing these mundane tasks. And in Twilight Princess, that's what it was. You had to go fishing and stop a bowl and all this stuff. And it just seemed, from my memory of playing that game, and I've only played through Twilight Princess once, so it's been a long time, but from my memory of playing that game, it was just really long and annoying, and then you were forced to be the wolf for a period of time, and after that, it was fine. It was good. Not only did I get that feeling almost immediately when I had to like go up and save that cat, and I was kind of dicking around, but there was the motion controls, and it just didn't feel good. It felt kind of sloppy. It didn't entrance me in the way it was supposed to, and honestly, playing it this time through, it's not really as bad as I remembered it the first couple of times. It felt like they were just kind of setting up the story, and they actually set it up pretty quick, but they had you do some really annoying things to do that. But anyways, the first time I played it for all of 4 hours, probably less. It was probably closer to an hour, because I didn't get off Skyloft, and I didn't pick it up again. And when I believe it was around the time the Switch was announced to be a thing, and that I knew the Zelda was going to be coming out. Didn't know it was going to be a launch title yet or anything like that. I knew I wasn't going to get a Wii U. Still, even if Zelda Breath of the Wild came out for just the Wii U, maybe, because at that point it would be Breath of the Wild and the 2 HD remakes. That was also they up-resed. I think Skyward Sword plays a little better on it. So that might have been a reason, but knowing that it was coming out for the Switch, I didn't do that. But I did retry Skyward Sword. Got a little further this time. Well, sort of. I think there was one other time I tried picking it up between those 2 points, but I don't remember. I was at the part where you're doing the wing ceremony and you have to take... Oh, this is really stupid. I feel stupid saying this out loud. It was at the wing ceremony and you had to fly the bird in the little contest, and I was just kind of pointing the Wiimote in the direction I wanted to go, and I didn't realize, because I had kind of I didn't restart it, I just kind of started where I left off. I didn't realize you had to swing the Wii remote to make the wings flap, because that sounds really stupid that you would need to do that, but that's how you flew up. And I don't know, I tried it a couple times, and again, I just kind of got annoyed. I didn't want to play it. I didn't like the motion controls. I kept hearing from so many people how good everything else about the game was, but I don't know. The 2 times I tried it, I couldn't get into it, but this time I played it. It's kind of like I had to force myself to do it, but I'm glad I did. Because as frustrating as I was while playing this game, I also think I got enough good out of it to counterbalance. And I'll get into that as I talk about my experience with the game. But that's my history with the game, and that's why it took me 8 years to beat it. Just because I didn't feel like dealing with the stamina bar. I didn't feel like waving my hands around. I didn't feel like rescuing that weird cat creature from the roof. And it all seems really silly, but I'm also a huge proponent of not forcing yourself to do something like that. Games are fun. Games are entertainment. If something's not entertaining, you shouldn't be doing it. Unless you're a, QA tester or a game journalist, which, I'm not a game journalist. I do the Mana Bar podcast. I'm doing this. I'm not a game journalist. I'm just a guy who likes games and thought it would be neat to talk about it. So I don't force myself. This time I did, but the quest that I'm on to beat every Zelda game was enough for me to justify myself, to force myself to play it. And I ended up looking forward to playing it every day, which was good. So, something I did want to talk about were the 5 tribes. I mentioned them earlier. I'm going to bring them up now to kind of top off the show. So I talked a little bit about the Gorons. Gorons, there wasn't really, in this game, this era of history in the Zelda universe, wasn't really much to talk about them, except, again, They were probably frontline infantry. There was only 3 of them in the world that you see. Then there's the Kiwi. I thought these guys and gals, creatures, they were adorable. I thought they were really cute. I enjoyed most of the races they introduced into this game. I thought they were all very interesting. You don't see the Kiwi anywhere else. Now, in reality, the only major games in the Zelda franchise we've gotten since are Spirit Tracks, A Link Between Worlds, and Breath of the Wild. Not a lot of room to really add them in to any continuity. Now, to me, it would be pretty obvious to connect the dots and say that the tree there eventually becomes the Deku tree somehow. And I would think, obviously, you only see them in one timeline. Again, going back to the whole birds evolving into the Rudo thing, you only see the Koroks in that sort of timeline because you see them in Wind Waker and Breath of the Wild. And this is all just to my knowledge. I didn't play Spirit Tracks yet. I have not beaten A Link Between Worlds, but I have not seen the Koroks in either of those games, as far as I know. The Kiwis kind of look like them. They kind of have the Koroks are like these kind of jelly bean looking guys with leaves on their head, but I don't know. If you look at them side by side, they both have the black pupils, and they're both kind of like forest-dwelling folk. So maybe when the Deku Tree became the Deku Tree, he eventually bestowed the Kiwi in the forest kind of these new forms, or possibly they're kind of evolutionary cousins of them. Either that or they died off. Or they could be related to that's a stretch. That's a stretch to say they're related to the Skull Children. Or maybe they're possibly related to some of the other creatures in the forest. But, it could just be that eventually they moved on or died out. Then there's the Perella. I think it's safe to say that they eventually somehow descended into the Zora. They kind of remind me of Octoroks, too. So maybe they could have devolved or could have evolved into 2 different races. I don't really have much to say on them. The Perella, they're there. They're in the water. The water dragon's there, kind of watching over them, but they were fine. They looked like seahorses. They were all right. They do look a lot like Octoroks, though. Like the eyes, like the snout. But if they're living in the water, they are the water-dwelling creatures of this universe. It's safe to say that they probably somehow evolved into the Zora. I mean, after Demise is defeated, Link and Zelda kind of go to the land and establish the Kingdom of Hyrule. Bang out, have a lot of little royal babies, and the royal family is born. I presume Link is the father. Or king. Maybe he becomes the king. Oh, that's something. Who knows how that affected the land? Who knows how Demise being defeated affected everything? The Perella don't look anything like the Zoras, really. The only connection is that they're both water-dwelling. So there could be no connection at all. I just think it's very interesting that there's a few races in future Zelda games that have no mention here. And there's a few races that you never hear from again. There has to be a connection there somewhere. Then you have the Magmas. Now, like I said before, the Goron are always those volcanic, mountain-dwelling folk. The only connection I've seen to the Magmas is in Minish Cap, because you get the Mole Myths again in Minish Cap, which kind of makes sense in the whole timeline continuity, but you never see the Magmas again. They were fine. The Magmas were okay. I couldn't really think of anybody that they reminded me of. I was trying to think if there were any other, like, Molemen in the Zelda universe that the Magmas could have turned into or have some sort of inheritance to, but I couldn't think of anybody. So maybe something happens to the Magmas and the Gorons kind of take over that world, that area. I mean, every other game. You're in a mountain or near a volcano. There's a Goron. This time there was 3 of them just kind of roaming the land. Maybe that's where, like, once the Kingdom of Hyrule is established, maybe that's where they kind of just congregate. Maybe live with the Magmas. Maybe the Magmas move to Dodongo Cavern, but then Dodongo eats them or does away with them. I'm not sure. And I mean, it's most likely the same area. You get the bomb flowers there. You get the bomb flowers in Ocarina of Time. It's safe to say that that becomes oh my god. I was about to say Mount Olympus. Oh, it escapes me what the mountain is called in Ocarina of Time. Death Mountain. I don't know why I thought Mount Olympus. So the Magmas are nowhere to be seen. Then there's the ancient robots. I might want to just save this for the next episode. Maybe I'll leave you all on a cliffhanger. But I have a very interesting theory that I want to really dig into a little more on where I think the ancient robots connect to the rest of the Zelda universe, because this is actually what the ancient robots are what made me do this podcast, because I had this really neat theory about them that I'm sure 1,000 other people have had. I don't know. I haven't really looked up whether or not other people have had opinions on this, and if I do, I'll be sure to source something. I think they have a really interesting connection to Breath of the Wild. So I'm going to save that for next time. But those are the races you see. And you see humans who eventually move to the ground and become the Hylians. And it's very interesting how, like if I was born on Skyloft and I was just in the sky but on land, and I just think of this surface world as I know it was a barrier that you couldn't penetrate, but did nobody try to go down there? Was there no exploration effort? It's just it's kind of funny how that happens, and how legends change over time and all of that stuff. But Skyloft itself is very charming. I thought as a central hub, I thought it worked very well, because there needed to be one. I was a little annoyed at the traveling. There wasn't really a fast travel. The closest thing to fast travel that there was in the game was you taking the bird, diving into a big old hole, and you could kind of choose where you wanted to land. That was the closest you got. Oh, that's something. I remembered something I wanted to talk about from earlier. In that 1,000-year period, Demise is sealed, and he, in his little blob form, I guess, or just sealed away completely. But was Girahim just kind of chilling around all that time? So Girahim is Demise's henchman, kind of opposite Fi, like that kind of yin-yang for Fi. Fi is the spirit within the Master Sword, if you didn't know. I assume if you're listening to this podcast that you've either A, played the games, or B, are just very curious as to what I have to say about the games. And either way, you could probably assume there's going to be some spoilers in this. Fi in the Master Sword is not a spoiler, I'm just saying. So you have Girahim kind of just chilling this entire time. Either that, or he was sealed away too, or he was in his sword form the entire time, recovering, like Bumblebee did in the movie recently, where he's just staying as a Volkswagen to heal himself. Or he's just kind of chilling. I don't know if he just somehow he found his way to Skyloft, but was he just waiting for the right time? Did he know that was the correct time to do that? Did Demise sense that the seal was breaking, and that, soon, this whole plan would come to fruition? Because Girahim was constantly trying to find a way to bring Demise back. But for all we know, Demise knew that the seal was weak. He was having him kind of gather monsters. I assume all of the monsters around the world were being controlled by Girahim, or at least, he was the general for all of those monsters at the time you're playing Skyward Sword. So was it just general chaos over those thousands of years, or was he kind of just picking his belly button, twiddling his thumbs, just kind of chilling around waiting? That was just one of the things I was thinking of. Either that, or he was just in sword form that entire time. Maybe he was on a pedestal somewhere, just waiting to reform as his humanoid form. It's also interesting that Demise is never mentioned in any of the other Zelda games. You see Demon Lord Ganon a lot. You see Ganondorf a lot. You see sometimes I'm going to call them B-side villains like Vadi. But you never really hear of this whole idea that there was an original bad guy, and you never really find out anything much about him. He's evil. He wants power. And at the end of the game, he's like, I am a curse that's going to be reincarnated, just like you guys are going to come back. But he comes back as Ganondorf. The first time he's reincarnated is as Ganondorf in Ocarina of Time. You don't see him any other time. You don't really see much of his personality. Like, granted, the personalities for the main characters of the Zelda franchise have always been a little, for the most part, basic, which I've never had a problem with it. Ganondorf's evil, he wants power. Link's the hero, he saves the day. Obviously, Link is supposed to more embody you as the player. Zelda's personality has shifted, I would say, depending on the game or depending on her role in the game. But, I mean, the bad guy's always just like, I'm bad, I want power. Ganondorf wore the crest of power in Ocarina of Time. That's all he craved. Demise couldn't, if it's true that you need all of the virtues to make the wish with the Triforce, there's no way Demise could have done that. He probably just wanted the power of it, not necessarily the wish granting. Which, that's another thing that you never really see in a lot of the Zelda games, is I don't remember there ever being a whole, it grants you a wish thing. I just remember it being power when combined. But I also haven't played like half the Zelda games, so maybe that's something I'm going to find out. So next time, I'm going to get into a little more about my initial thoughts of playing Skyward Sword and where the story went and little things that I picked up on here and there, or little things that I'd like to kind of delve further into. And I'm going to start off by talking about the thing I just teased about my whole like ancient robots theory, because that's the thing I'm actually very excited to talk about. This episode started off very odd because of the Nintendo Direct thing, but it's normally not going to involve any big breaking Zelda news like that. That just so happened to coincide with the Nintendo Direct, which was just kind of funny. So, you can find me on Twitter, at Hylian Andy. You can also find me on the Manabar Video Game Podcast, and you can find this on YouTube, if you want to watch the video version, or as a part of the Manabar Video Game Podcast, if you'd like to listen to the audio version. This is a special series I do on the side of the Manabar Podcast. The Manabar Podcast is the official weekly episodic thing that me, Matt, and Dan do. And you can find that on YouTube or on Twitter at Manabar Podcast. And you can also email me at hylianandy@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from anybody who has any thoughts about what I've said or comments, or feel free to comment on Twitter or on the YouTube video. I'd love to hear from everybody. I want to breed conversation. I want to hear from people, and I want to hear everyone else's ideas. Not just mine. I'm not that egotistical. Well, a little. Not much. And if there's something, which I'm sure there's 1,000 things I missed, please point that out too. If you're thinking to yourself, the Rudo were in like 5 or 6 other Zelda games, I don't know what this guy's talking about, let me know. Because I'm probably just wrong. Because I'm human. But that's the type of discussion I want. I want, even if it's just pointing out how wrong I am or how wrong you think I am, that's still conversation that I want to breed. As well as constructive criticism if there's anything you'd like to see me do differently or go into something that you might have think I skipped over. Feel free to say anything. I love hearing from people. With that, this has been episode 1. And remember, it's dangerous to go alone. Take this.